On December 1, next week, we will have childcare workers in their next pay packet after that will have a 10% increase.
Forget questions about who blew up a deal with the Greens or when the election is going to be held. The big question for a government under pressure after last week's rush of legislation through the Senate is how it changes the political landscape. In 2024, that means how does all this legislation affect cost of living issues?
We work each and every day to make a difference, and the legislation that was passed will make a difference.
For the Prime Minister, the image of childcare workers getting a pay rise in their hands next week was at least one concrete example of how the government is making a difference. The federal election won't be won or lost on the government's record of getting legislation through the Parliament, but on the four issues that have dominated politics all year: housing, immigration and energy, but overwhelmingly the cost of living.
The cost of living is something that impacts 100% of voters. They're all hurt by it and they're all angry about it. And they're telling every single polling organisation across the country that they're disappointed in the government's record on it. I think the actions of the government in getting legislation through last week, at least it makes them look like they're worried about losing. The impression that I think the voters were getting out in the broader community was that they weren't particularly disturbed about it, starting from the Prime Minister down.
The government now has its arguments lined up on what it has done for voters on the cost of living.
We started the year by delivering a tax cut for every single Australian taxpayer, and we're ending it by delivering more help for households. My message is we have your back, holding supermarkets to account to get fairer prices at the checkout, 80,000 new homes for renters, helping 40,000 Australians to be able to buy a home. Historic aged care reform, tens of thousands of new jobs in manufacturing powered by clean energy through our Future Made in Australia plan.
The government also now has housing assistance to spruik and policies that have eased power bills. It is not clear how the Coalition's still vague nuclear energy policy will play for the government or the opposition. But underneath last week's events lie two big changes in the political landscape. The Greens' capitulation, first on housing, then on all the other bills that went through on Thursday, mean the government is no longer fighting political battles on two fronts, and that inevitably puts more pressure on the opposition.
I think it makes life a little bit more challenging for Dutton. He can't afford to sit back and relax and drift into government, rather like Labor did last time. He's actually got to get out there and present some policies that are going to make a difference to the living standards of ordinary Australians.
Opposition leader Peter Dutton has been notable for his absences from much of the media fray this year, though that has not stopped him dominating the debate. Since the breakthrough in the Senate last Thursday, he has made just one media appearance.
They spent a monster of taxpayers' money to get the Greens across the line in a pretty unholy alliance, and I think people see through it.
But that is exactly the point the Prime Minister isn't making. The grand bargain that got all that legislation through the Senate last week allowed the government to tell voters that it had made no concessions to the Greens, that there had been no Greens-inspired amendments to its legislation.
We wanted to get legislation passed, but it would be on the basis of our values. And we held the line on areas like housing, and they changed their mind, the Greens political party, and they went through unamended. We will hold to our values. We won't allow any tail to wag the dog.
While the arguments rage about just why the government did not proceed with environmental legislation, the bottom line is that putting all deals aside means the government once again avoided making any concessions to the Greens. The PM is making sure voters, who may be concerned about what would happen in a Labor minority government, know that the Greens will not be calling the shots.
We're negotiating across the Parliament with the Coalition, all the crossbenchers, a range of measures. Things that we didn't have agreement on were put aside. That was one of them.
Okay.
The question is how the Coalition now responds.
A whole lot of things are happening to the Australian community, the political community now, because of increasing migration. The Indo-Pacific migrants, which are making up 80% of our population growth, are currently voting for the left, but they are highly aspirational and they're strongly transactional. And I think obviously from Dutton's point of view, the thing he could be looking at would be tax cuts.
Tax cuts, of course, are a hard ask when you are already arguing the budget needs to be tighter. But with the election possibly only a couple of months away, and Labor having now legislated most of its policies, there should be plenty more hard asks of the Coalition in coming months.